is still working and operating and you put it in manual, the PLC is still monitoring that. So if you put it in manual and you start basically the pump and there is no flow, after 30 seconds the light will still flash because it doesn't detect the flow. But the PLC is not controlling the motor anymore because that is the manual mode.
Yeah. So the error point is only the flow.
Yes. And what could that be? What could be the cause that the signal of the PLC doesn't get a signal of the flow switch?
I think it's I think.
No. What could it be?
I think it can be a level from the pump and level from the tank.
No.
Oh.
No, a flow switch is what it says, it detects a flow. Now, if the signal is not received by the PLC, it's either you don't have a flow, or you do have a flow, but the signal is not conveyed to the PLC. And how is the signal conveyed from the switch to the PLC?
It can be voltage 0 to 10, 5 to 10 or ampere, 4 to 20 milliampere.
No. It's a switch signal, so it is an on-off signal. On that point, yeah, it's an on-off signal. So it's not a range, it's not a sensor. So if you have a switch, and we do have a switch, and we measure and we have a switch signal, but the PLC is not receiving it, it means that we transfer that electrical signal through a wire. So if the PLC is not receiving it, it means there might be something wrong in the wire or a connection of the wire. Here you probably not have a lot of problems with mice, but in other locations there's a lot of places that you have little mice and eat the cable. And at some point basically the cable is broken, or the cable, if you have two cables, make constantly contact because the insulation is eaten away and it makes constantly contact. So it means basically you think from, oh yeah, the switch is constantly, the pump is off but I still have flow. It's unlikely you're going to find that here, but it is, I've seen it many times before. But what you see here is when you're not receiving a signal from a switch or also a sensor, you should always check the wiring on that point. Because wiring can be affected by a lot of different things. I mentioned already the mouse. Do you think ants can eat wires?
Yeah.
No, normal ants also.
Yeah.
Ants eat wire. A lot of people say, oh yeah, ants, little things. Yeah, they do eat wire. It's not only mice. So yeah, that, and ants you definitely have here on the island. I don't know what they did, but even on islands you have ants. At some point they came with boats here and things. So don't be surprised basically. Check if you're not having a signal and you measure on the switch itself, check your wiring.
Yeah. And I don't know where to put the flow. I don't know. You should in the tank or in the
No, a flow switch is normally installed on the pipe itself, because that's how you measure the flow on that point. When you have a switch in the tank, that is a float switch. So there's a difference between flow and float. A float switch is basically is floating in the tank and goes up, click, and goes down, or you have these little magnetic ones, goes up, down. These are float switches.
Oh, it is float.
You can see them. Yeah. If you go into the pump room,
And so you
you can see
Some red device, red
flow
device.
Yes.
Yeah, flow switch.
Yeah, that is a flow switch.
Flow switch.
If you go and a float switch, you know where you can see them? You have the flush tank, You have the flush tank in the RO, in the desalination room. When you walk in, you have the skid here, you have a skid there, you see the flush tank. You open up, you look in there, you have 2 float switches. So these are basically the water level switches that you float in there.
The floor one.
Oh, yeah.
These are small ones. In the flush tank you have these yellow, blue, big ones that are floating up and down. But that are also float switches. Okay, so when we push with that with the pump the ocean water through the ultrafilter, then basically we catch the water in a ultrafiltered water tank on that point. So that is basically the seawater filtered to a very fine stage, so a lot of material impurities are basically taken out. Because if we don't do that, it would all get stuck in the membranes. And the membranes basically are so fine that if that gets stuck so quickly, we have to replace it. It doesn't work anymore, we have to replace it, and these things are not cheap on that point. So it's cheaper to change ultrafiltration micropore filters basically than RO filters. So from there we pump the water through the RO stage. Now we have 2 pumps in that stage. We have a pump that pre-pressurized the water for the big pressure pump. Now the big pressure pump is the one that goes the big pump, that is a piston pump. It makes a very distinctive noise when you start it up. It started up with a VSD very slowly on that point, because it's a mechanical type of pump. If you would start it up as direct online or any other starting method, you would put so much stress on the mechanism, you would break that pump within no time on that point. And again, everything we deal with this kit here is not cheap. It's actually quite expensive. So there's a lot of care in the control. There's a lot of care taken in the control in order to get things smooth up to working speed. So the VSD is one thing of that. Now the VSD is programmed. You should actually never touch in the menu of the VSD. It is set. On that point you give a start signal and the thing does its thing. On that point you have no business in that VSD, to be honest. On that point, if there is really a big error in that VSD, you should report it. You should not try yourself unless you're really familiar with the VSD and the manual and know what you're doing. Then yeah, of course. But if you're not 100% sure of that, better to call somebody else that knows what he's doing on that thing, on that point. There's nothing wrong to say from, sorry, I know a lot, but this is what I don't know. There's nothing wrong with saying that. There's a lot of people say from, oh, but I'm in this position and it doesn't work and I have to make it, but I actually don't know it, and I try something. And most of the time you make it worse. And to be honest, the only thing that can be blamed at you is that you started with it. Not that you made it worse, because you don't know. We can only say, you did not say, I don't know, this is my limit, sorry. That's it. Maybe people not happy, okay, not happy. But I can tell you, you do something and you break it even further, people are really not happy. So you can choose, not happy or really not happy. I choose not happy. Be very honest with your limits. If you have limits, there's nothing wrong. Everybody has limits. I have limits. Huh? I have limits. Everybody has limits. Huh? So don't worry about that. So, but before the pump, the VSD is started up, that pump needs a certain pressure on that point. If it is too low pressure, again the pump gets damaged. So we have a smaller pump in front of it, which means basically we start that first. That builds up the pressure to a level that the big pump can be started. Now this is all, okay, there are manual switches on this one, but electronic in the control, it's also regulated on that point. Now this small pump has again pressure switches on that point, which means that if it starts and it pumps water and there is not enough pressure, then it will basically give an alarm and say, stop, I don't have enough pressure to start up the big pump. That's again a protection. On top of that, we have also a pressure switch directly connected to the VSD, which means that if a pressure switch is broken and the pump thinks from, okay, I'm still pumping